Okay, so we're going to talk about a story that's over 1,000 years old, but honestly, it feels like it could have been a blockbuster movie that came out last summer. It's got it all: a larger-than-life hero, absolutely terrifying monsters, and it pretty much created the blueprint for every adventure story you love, which kind of makes you wonder, doesn't it?
I mean, think about it. Star Wars, Harry Potter, The Matrix, you name it. It's always a young hero, a call to adventure they might not want, and just impossible odds. Why does that same formula work so well time and time again? And where did it even come from?
Well, it's because they're all tapping into this universal pattern, something scholars call the monomyth or the hero's journey. The hero has to leave their normal life behind, they face these incredible trials, and they come back. But they're not the same person, they're changed. It's a structure that just clicks with us on a deep level, you know? It's all about struggle and growth.
But here's the kicker. This is not a modern Hollywood invention. This pattern is ancient. And one of the earliest, most powerful examples of it in the English language is an epic poem called Beowulf. So yeah, let's dive into the story that arguably started it all.
All right, first things first, we need to get the basics down. Who exactly is this hero? What is he fighting? And what kind of world are we even talking about here? This is where it all begins.
So the setup is this. Beowulf is basically a freelance monster slayer. He hears that this king over in Denmark is having some trouble. Specifically, a monster named Grendel is crashing his parties every single night. So Beowulf sails over to help. But after he takes care of Grendel, he has to deal with the monster's even scarier mom. And then, years later, as an old king himself, he faces his final challenge, a dragon. It's a perfect three-act structure with three epic monsters.
But here's where it gets really interesting. These monsters aren't just big, scary creatures for the sake of it. No, they stand for real-world fears. Grendel, he's the ultimate outcast, a symbol of envy and rage against a community he can't join. His mother is pure, primal vengeance. And the dragon? Well, that's just greed and death itself. They're all metaphors for the inner demons we all have to fight.
And this shows you exactly how storytelling works, right? Back then, their monsters were born from a fear of the dark woods, the deep ocean, all the chaos just outside the firelight. Today, our villains come from our modern anxieties. The corrupt billionaire, the rogue AI, the socially isolated villain. The monsters change their faces, but our need for a hero to stand against them, that never goes away.
Now, we have to talk about how people actually experienced this story, because it was totally different from how we do things today. You couldn't just download the ebook.
So, picture this. You're in a huge wooden hall, a fire's roaring, and a professional poet, they called him a scop, stands up to perform. Beowulf was meant to be heard, not read. It was live, it was loud, it was a shared experience. Think of it as the original epic movie night, but with a guy, a harp, and a story performed completely from memory.
So, how on earth did they remember thousands of lines of this stuff? Well, they had a secret weapon, alliterative verse. Instead of rhyming at the end of lines, Old English poetry used repeating sounds at the beginning of words. This created this heavy, driving beat that made it easier to memorize and just sounded awesome. It was the poem's own built-in soundtrack.
And they had another cool trick called kennings. Instead of a simple word like the sea, the poet would get creative and call it the whale road. A king wasn't just a king, he was a ring giver. It's like building these little poetic riddles right into the language. It made everything sound so much more vivid and epic.
Okay, so it's an old story with some cool language. But why does it matter? Why do we still study this thing and call it one of the most important pieces of English literature ever?
Well, just take a look at this. Beowulf is way back there, centuries before guys like Chaucer or Shakespeare ever picked up a pen. It's foundational. But I want you to notice that date near the end, 1936. That's a super important moment when one professor at Oxford basically changed how the entire world saw this poem.
And yup, that professor was J.R.R. Tolkien. Before him, a lot of scholars kind of dismissed Beowulf as just some primitive fairy tale. But Tolkien, who was a world-class Beowulf expert, stood up and argued that the monsters were the whole point. He said they gave the poem its deep, profound meaning. And his own books, The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings, they are packed with the DNA of Beowulf, from the treasure-hoarding dragon to the heroic codes. He basically took its soul and created modern fantasy as we know it.
Which brings us right back to where we started. This isn't just an awesome story.
It's about something we all fundamentally need.
Look, at the end of the day, Beowulf isn't really about a guy fighting monsters. It's about facing down the monsters inside us. It's about having courage when you know you're doomed, being loyal to your friends, and that constant struggle between good and evil that plays out on all of us. These stories are like maps for navigating our own lives.
And that's exactly why stories are so much more than just entertainment. As this quote says, they are tools. They help us understand other people, they show us what courage looks like, and they help us make just a little more sense of this crazy, chaotic world.
So the next time you're watching a superhero movie or getting lost in a fantasy novel, just for a second, think back to that smoky hall and that ancient poet. Think about Beowulf, because we are still telling that same story over and over, trying to find the heroes we need for the monsters we face right now. Which really leaves just one question to think about. What monsters are our stories helping us fight today?